Welcome to the Global News Podcast on YouTube, where we take a deeper look at one of the stories in the headlines. Hello, I'm Oliver Conway. And today we're asking, has the Trump administration committed war crimes? Amid reports that the US military killed 2 people clinging to wreckage in the sea after they survived an initial airstrike on their boat. I'm joined by our Latin America online editor, Vanessa Buschschlüter. Vanessa, this strike came about as part of President Trump's campaign against Venezuela. Why is there so much animosity between the US and Venezuela?
Ollie, there have long been tensions between the two countries, and I would say that they go back as far as 25 years ago or 26 years ago when the former president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, came to power. Now, he was a left-wing leader who often accused the United States of imperialism. And more recently, his successor in office, Nicolás Maduro, was re-elected in an election that was widely dismissed as rigged by the United States and the Venezuelan opposition, as well as many other countries. And it has been since then that the US has been ramping up pressure on Nicolás Maduro, whom they declare an illegitimate leader. But more recently, the Trump administration has also accused the Venezuelan government of being behind 2 of the problems that Trump has promised to eradicate. One of them is the flow of migrants to the US, and the other one is the flow of illicit drugs into the country.
And so for the past 3 months, we've seen the US military targeting these boats in the waters off Venezuela. Just tell us what's been going on.
That's right. So back in September, the US decided to ramp up its war on drugs, and they decided to focus in on fast boats transporting drugs in the Caribbean. And in order to stop those boats, they deployed a huge amount of warships and of US military and Navy forces. And on the 2nd of September, they launched a strike on a boat in the Caribbean, which they said was carrying drugs to the US. And that boat was blown up and 11 people on board were killed.
Yeah, this was the first strike of the campaign, and this is the one that's caused all the controversy. Exactly what happened?
That's right. So the US military saw this small vessel in international waters, and they told the US public and the media later that they were convinced that this boat was carrying drugs. However, they have not provided any evidence that, or publicly at least, they haven't provided any evidence that it was carrying drugs. And then they launched what they call a kinetic strike. Now, it has now transpired that after that first strike, there was a second strike. And the Washington Post newspaper alleges that this was because the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, had, in the run-up to this strike, given orders to, I quote, kill everyone on board. Now, in the first strike, the boat was destroyed, and video has shown that 2 people on board survived, 2 out of the 11, and were clinging to the wreckage. And it is then that a second strike was launched in which those 2 survivors were killed. And that's what has now caused this fresh controversy. There were already discussions about the legality of the strikes in general, but now this second strike, what is called in military parlance a double tap, has raised many concerns on both sides of the political aisle in the United States.
So is it a war crime to kill people who survive an initial strike and may be wounded just trying to cling to life?
Many legal experts say it is. Of course, the Geneva Convention says that once enemy combatants, and there's also the question whether these were enemy combatants, but let's assume that they were. Once enemy combatants are rendered helpless, they have to be offered help and they cannot be killed. So this would appear to be in contravention of the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, it's caused a huge row. Some Democrats say it is a war crime. What has the Trump administration said?
The Trump administration has all along said that these strikes are an act of self-defense. Of course, there's many people in the United States who've died because they have consumed fentanyl, a very potent drug, which is 50 times as potent as heroin. And it argues that by targeting these boats, which it says are carrying fentanyl, it is saving the lives of thousands and thousands of people who thereby are not taking fentanyl, which is, by preventing these drugs reaching the country, these lives are being saved. So they have this definition of the people allegedly carrying these drugs being out to kill Americans. And therefore, they say that killing them while they are allegedly transporting these drugs is an act of self-defense, and it is therefore, in their logic, legal.
And specifically, what have they said about this so-called double tap strike?
Well, President Donald Trump has said that he actually would not have wanted such a second strike, such a double tap, to have been carried out. And actually, the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, said that he did not give such an order. So he denied the reporting by the Washington Post and called it fake news. However, the press secretary of the Trump administration, Karoline Leavitt, had this to say.
With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
Karoline Leavitt there. Now, as you said, the US says it's trying to get rid of this danger posed to people in America. Does it really stack up, this justification?
I think the first thing we have to look at is that the Trump administration has repeatedly said that fentanyl was being carried on these boats. I think that is highly unlikely, mainly because fentanyl isn't produced in Venezuela or in neighboring Colombia. Fentanyl is mainly produced in Mexico, and therefore it wouldn't make sense to go south from Mexico to then smuggle it through Venezuela back into the United States. The majority of fentanyl comes via the land route across the US southern border and is actually mostly smuggled by US citizens. So that already, I think, we can dismiss. Do these boats carry other drugs like cocaine? It's likely that some of them do. However, in this one strike that we're talking about, of the 2nd of September, there were 11 people on board this relatively small vessel. So what a lot of people who specialize in counter-narcotics are saying is that normally when you have a boat carrying drugs, you try to minimize the weight that it's carrying so that you can maximize the amount of drugs you're transporting. So having 11 people on board is unlikely. I'm not saying that the boat wasn't carrying drugs. It could have been. But it probably also might have been carrying migrants trying to get to one of the neighboring islands. So there is the possibility that at least some of those on board may not have been involved in any trafficking. And of course, the Trump administration has not provided any public evidence of there being any drugs on board.
Now, as we were saying, this was the first of a series of attacks on boats. Something like 80 people have been killed. Have there been any other cases where there have been survivors?
There have been. There was one case where a semi-submersible vessel was targeted, and there were 2 survivors in that strike, one Colombian national and one Ecuadorian national. And the Ecuadorian national was actually returned by the US officials to his home country, and he was actually taken to the authorities there, and they felt that because he had not committed any crime in Ecuador, he was free to leave. So there, the case was made that there was no case against him.
Now, where does this American campaign against Venezuela, where does it go next?
Many are saying that the size of the deployment, the US deployment in the Caribbean, is too large to be a counter-narcotics operation, which is what the US has said time and time again is its stated aim. So many are saying, of course, in the Venezuelan government, but also in other parts of the world, for example, neighboring Colombia, that this is an operation to remove Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, from power.
Vanessa Buschschlüter, our Latin America Online editor, thank you. If you'd like to hear more international news, then check out the Global News podcast wherever you get your BBC podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. And if you want us to cover anything, please leave a message in the comments below. But that's it for now from the Global News podcast on YouTube.